Hi, Saxons. This is Ms. Masters coming at you from my home office today. In honor of the last First Chapter Friday of Hispanic Heritage Month and the first one of October, I'm going to read to you from the horror novel Mexican Gothic, written by Mexican-Canadian author Silvia Moreno Garcia. The novel is a mix of the classic Rebecca and Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which you might have seen in its miniseries form on Netflix. Set in 1950s Mexico, Mexican Gothic centers on a socialite, Noemi, who is called away from her gilded life to a mysterious mansion housing both her newlywed cousin, who is seemingly descending into madness, and a whole lot of eerie secrets. In this excerpt, which is not actually the first chapter, I just picked it because it was interesting, we see Noemi interact with her cousin, Catalina, Catalina's English husband, and a doctor who believes Catalina may be suffering from tuberculosis. Of course, all is not as it seems. Catalina sat by the window again that morning. She seemed remote, like the last time Noemi had seen her. Noemi thought of a drawing of Ophelia that used to hang in their house. Ophelia dragged by the current, glimpsed through a wall of reeds. This was Catalina that morning. Yet it was good to see her, to sit together and update her cousin on the people and things in Mexico City. She detailed an exhibit she had been to 3 weeks prior, knowing Catalina would be interested in such things, and then imitated a couple of friends of theirs with such accuracy a smile formed on her cousin's lips, and Catalina laughed. "You are so good when you do impressions. Tell me, are you still bent on those theater classes?" Catalina asked. "No, I've been thinking about anthropology. A master's degree. Doesn't that sound interesting?" "Always with a new idea, Noemi. Always a new pursuit." She'd heard such a refrain often. She supposed that her family was right to view her university studies skeptically, seeing as she changed her mind already thrice about where her interests lay. But she knew rather fiercely that she wanted to do something special with her life. She hadn't found what exactly that would be, although anthropology appeared to her more promising than previous explorations. Anyway, when Catalina spoke, Noemi didn't mind, because her words never sounded like her parents' reproaches. Catalina was a creature of sighs and phrases as delicate as lace. Catalina was a dreamer, and therefore believed in Noemi's dreams. "And you? What have you been up to? Don't think I haven't noticed you hardly write. Have you been pretending you live on a windswept moor like in Wuthering Heights?" Noemi asked. Catalina had worn out the pages of that book. "No, it's the house. The house takes most of my time," Catalina said, extending a hand and touching the velvet drapes. "Were you planning on renovating it? I wouldn't blame you if you razed it and built it anew. It's rather ghastly, isn't it? And chilly, too." "Damp. There's a dampness to it." "I was too busy freezing to death last night to mind the dampness." "The darkness and the damp. It's always damp and dark and so very cold." As Catalina spoke, the smile on her lips died. Her eyes, which had been distant, suddenly fell on Noemi with the sharpness of a blade. She clutched Noemi's hands and leaned forward, speaking low. "I need you to do a favor for me, but you can't tell anyone about it. You must promise you won't tell. Promise?" "I promise." "There's a woman in town. Her name is Marta Duval. She made a batch of medicine for me, but I've run out of it. You must go to her and get more. Do you understand?" "Yes, of course. What kind of medicine is it?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you do it, will you? Please say you will, and tell no one about it." "Yes, if you want me to." Catalina nodded. She was clutching Noemi's hands so tightly that her nails were digging into the soft flesh of her wrists. "Catalina, I'll speak to—" "Shh! They can hear you," Catalina said, and went quiet, her eyes bright as polished stones. "Who can hear me?" Noemi asked slowly, as her cousin's eyes fixed on her, unblinking. Catalina slowly leaned closer, whispering in her ear, "It's in the walls. she said. What is? Noemi asked, and the question was a reflex, for she found it hard to think what to ask with her cousin's blank eyes upon her, eyes that did not seem to see. It was like staring into a sleepwalker's face. The walls speak to me. They tell me secrets. Don't listen to them. Press your hands against your ears, Noemi. There are ghosts. They're real. You'll see them eventually. Abruptly, Catalina released her cousin and stood up, gripping the curtain with her right hand and staring out the window. Noemi wanted to ask her to explain herself, but Florence walked in then. Dr. Cummins has arrived. He needs to examine Catalina and will meet you in the sitting room later, the woman said. I don't mind staying, Noemi replied. But he'll mind, Florence told her with a definite finality. Noemi could have pressed the point, but she elected to leave rather than get into an argument. She knew when to back down, and she could sense that insisting now would result in a hostile refusal. They might even send her packing if she made a fuss. She was a guest, but she knew herself to be an inconvenient one. The sitting room in the daytime, once she peeled the curtains aside, seemed much less welcoming than at night. For one, it was chilly. The fire that had warmed the room turned to ashes, and with daylight streaming through the windows, every imperfection was laid bare more strikingly. The faded velour settees appeared a sickly green, almost bilious, and there were many cracks running down the enamel tiles decorating the fireplace. A little oil painting, showing a mushroom from different angles, had been attacked, ironically, by mold. Tiny black spots marred its colors and defaced the image. Her cousin was right about the dampness. Noemi rubbed her wrists, looking at the place where Catalina had dug her nails against her skin, and waited for the doctor to come downstairs. He took his time, and when he walked into the sitting room he was not alone. Virgil accompanied him. She sat on one of the green settees, and the doctor took the other one, setting his black leather bag at his side. Virgil remained standing. I'm Arthur Cummins, the doctor said. You must be Miss Noemi Taboada. The doctor dressed in clothes of a good cut, but which were a decade or two out of fashion. It felt like everyone who visited High Place had been stuck in time, but then she imagined in such a small town there would be little need to update one's wardrobe. Virgil's clothing, however, seemed fashionable. Either he had bought himself a new wardrobe the last time he'd been in Mexico City, or he considered himself exceptional, and his clothes worthy of more expense. Perhaps it was his wife's money that allowed for a certain lavishness. Yes, thank you for taking the time to speak to me, Noemi said. It's my pleasure. Now, Virgil says you have a few questions for me. I do. They tell me my cousin has tuberculosis? Before she could continue, the doctor was nodding and speaking. She does. It's nothing to be concerned about. She's been receiving streptomycin to help her get over it, but the rest cure still holds true. Plenty of sleep, plenty of relaxation, and a good diet are the true solution to this malady. The doctor took off his glasses and took out a handkerchief, proceeding to clean the lenses as he spoke. An ice bag on the head or an alcohol rub, that's really what all this is about. It will pass. Soon she'll be right as rain. Now, if you'll excuse me. The doctor stuffed the glasses in the breast pocket of his jacket, no doubt intending to leave the conversation at that, but it was Noemi's turn to interrupt him. No, I won't excuse you yet. Catalina is very odd. When I was a little girl, I remember my Aunt Brigida had tuberculosis, and she did not act like Catalina at all. Every patient is different. She wrote a very uncharacteristic letter to my father, and she seems unlike herself, Noemi said, trying to put her impressions into words. She has changed. Tuberculosis doesn't change a person. It merely intensifies the traits the patient already possesses. Well, then there's definitely something wrong with Catalina, because she's never possessed this listlessness. She has such an odd look about her. The doctor took out his glasses and put them on again. He must have not liked what he saw, and frowned. You did not let me finish, the doctor muttered, sounding snappish. His eyes were hard. She pressed her lips together. Your cousin is a very anxious girl, quite melancholic, and the illness has intensified this. Catalina is not anxious. You deny her depressive tendencies? Noemi recalled what her father had said in Mexico City. He'd called Catalina melodramatic. But melodramatic and anxious were not the same thing at all, and Catalina had definitely never heard voices in Mexico City, and she hadn't had that bizarre expression on her face. What depressive tendencies? Noemi asked. When her mother died, she became withdrawn, Virgil said. She had periods of great melancholy, crying in her room and talking nonsense. It's worse now. He had not spoken until then, and now he chose to bring that up. And not only to bring it up, but to speak with a careful detachment, as if he was describing a stranger instead of his wife. Yes, and as you said, her mother had died, Noemi replied. And that was years and years ago, when she was a girl. Perhaps you'll find certain things come back, he said. Although tuberculosis is hardly a death sentence, it can still be upsetting for the patient, the doctor explained. The isolation, the physical symptoms. Your cousin has suffered from chills and night sweats. They're not a pretty sight. I assure you, the codeine provides temporary relief. You cannot expect her to be cheery and baking pies. I'm concerned. She's my cousin, after all. Yes, but if you begin to get agitated too, then we won't be better off, will we? The doctor said, shaking his head. Now, I really must be going. I'll see you next week, Virgil. Doctor, she said. No, I will be going, the doctor repeated, like a man who has become aware of an impending mutiny aboard a ship. The doctor shook Noemi's hand, grabbed his bag, and off he went, leaving her upon the grotesque settee, biting her lips and not knowing what to say. Virgil took the spot the doctor had vacated and leaned back, aloof. If there ever was a man who had ice in his veins, it was this one. His face was bloodless. Had he really courted Catalina? Courted anyone? She could not picture him expressing affection toward any living thing. Dr. Cummins is a very capable physician, he said with a voice that was indifferent. A voice that indicated he would not have cared if Cummins was the best or worst physician on earth. His father was the family's doctor, and now he watches over our health. I assure you, he has never been found lacking in any way. I'm sure he's a good doctor. You do not sound sure. She shrugged, trying to make light of it, thinking that if she kept a smile on her face and her words were airy, he might be more receptive. After all, he seemed to be taking this whole matter lightly. If Catalina is ill, she might be better off in a sanatorium close to Mexico City, somewhere where she can be tended to properly. You don't believe I can tend to my wife? I didn't say that, but this house is cold, and the fog outside is not the most uplifting sight. Is this the mission that your father gave you? Virgil asked, that you would come here and snatch Catalina away? She shook her head. No. It feels like it, he said briskly, though he did not sound upset. The words remained cold. I realize that my home is not the most modern and most fashionable that there is. High Place was once a beacon, a shining jewel of a house, and the mine produced so much silver that we could afford to cram armoires with silks and velvet and fill our cups with the finest wines. It is not so anymore. But we know how to take care of ill people. My father is old, he's not in perfect health, yet we tend to him adequately. I wouldn't do any less for the woman I've married. Still, I would like to ask perhaps what Catalina needs as a specialist in other matters, a psychiatrist? He laughed so loudly she jumped a little in her seat, for until now his face had been very serious, and the laughter was unpleasant. The laughter challenged her, and his eyes settled on her. A psychiatrist? And where might you find one round these parts? You think he might be summoned out of thin air? There is a public clinic in town with a single doctor and nothing more. You'll hardly find a psychiatrist there. You'd have to head to Pachuca, maybe even to Mexico City and fetch one. I doubt they'd come. At least the doctor at the clinic might offer a second opinion, or he might have other ideas about Catalina. There's a reason why my father brought his own doctor from England, and it's not because the healthcare in this place was magnificent. The town is poor, and the people there are coarse, primitive. It's not a place crawling with doctors. I must insist. Yes, I do believe you will insist, he said, standing up, the striking blue eyes still unkindly fixed on her. You get your way in most things, don't you, Miss Taboada? Your father does as you wish. Men do as you wish. He reminded her of the fellow she'd danced with at a party the previous summer. They had been having fun, briskly stepping to a danzon, and then came time for the ballads. During some enchanted evening, the man held her far too tightly and tried to kiss her. She turned her head, and when she looked at him again, there was pure dark mockery across his features. Noemi stared back at Virgil, and he stared at her with that same sort of mockery, a bitter, ugly stare. What do you mean? She asked, challenge peppering the question. I recall Catalina mentioning how insistent you can be when you want a beau to do your bidding. I won't fight you. Get your second opinion if you can find it, he said with a chilling finality as he walked out of the room. She felt a little pleased to have needled him. She sensed that he had expected, as had the doctor, that she would accept his words mutely. If you are intrigued by this chapter from Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, you can get it in audio or ebook form on the Sora app or on soraapp.com. Have a great weekend, Saxons.